In popular culture, the collapse of France in 1940 is often explained with a single lazy sentence that the French army was weak, outdated, and unwilling to fight. This image has been repeated so often that it feels like common sense, yet it collapses the moment we look closer. The reality of the French campaign is far more complex and in many ways far more uncomfortable. In 1940, France did not field a backward or passive army. On paper and in practice, the French armed forces were among the most modern in the world. In some areas, they were even more motorized than their German opponent. The idea that French soldiers simply hid behind the Maginot Line while waiting for defeat is a post-war myth, not a historical fact. When Germany launched its offensive in May 1940, the French army immediately moved forward. French and British forces advanced into Belgium exactly as planned, attempting to meet the German attack away from French territory. This was not a defensive collapse, but an active maneuver based on the strategic assumptions of the time. French soldiers fought continuously from the first days of the campaign, suffering heavy losses in battles that are rarely mentioned today. Entire divisions were destroyed holding their positions, buying time that is almost never credited to them. Courage was not the missing ingredient in 1940. What truly defined the campaign was not the absence of French will, but the clash between two different visions of modern war. France had built its military thinking around the experience of the First World War. It expected a long conflict, slow to develop, dominated by material strength, artillery, and defensive depth. Germany embraced something radically different, a doctrine that prioritized speed, concentration of force, and the ruthless exploitation of surprise. The German army was not simply better equipped, it was better aligned around a single operational idea. This doctrinal coherence mattered more than individual weapons or bravery on the battlefield. Another uncomfortable truth is that France was fighting under severe structural constraints. Unlike Germany, it had to disperse its forces across multiple fronts and responsibilities. Colonial commitments, the Italian border, and internal security all consumed manpower and equipment. Numerically, France was not the giant it is often imagined to be. Germany entered the campaign with significantly more divisions and a much larger population base. The margin was not overwhelming, but it mattered, especially once losses began to mount. This is why the fall of France cannot be reduced to cowardice or incompetence. It was the result of a modern army prepared for the wrong kind of war, facing an enemy willing to gamble everything on speed and shock. To understand 1940, we must abandon caricatures and confront the reality that even capable, determined forces can collapse when doctrine, coordination, and timing fail at the same moment. One of the most decisive weaknesses of the French campaign in 1940 was not morale or numbers, but the condition of its air force. While France possessed skilled pilots and some capable aircraft, its air arm was structurally unprepared for modern war. Many fighter and bomber designs were outdated, production was slow, and coordination with ground forces was poor. As a result, French units often fought without consistent air support, while German forces operated under near-constant Luftwaffe cover. Air superiority shaped the battlefield long before tanks reached the front lines. German aircraft disrupted French communications, destroyed bridges, attacked troop concentrations, and paralyzed movement behind the lines. French commanders frequently received delayed or incomplete information, forcing them to make decisions based on an outdated picture of the situation. This fog of war was not accidental. It was produced deliberately by a doctrine that treated air power as an integral part of ground operations. French armored forces suffered from a similar structural problem. Individual French tanks were often well-armored and heavily armed, sometimes superior to German counterparts in direct combat. Vehicles like the Char B-1 or Somua S-35 could dominate one-on-one encounters. However, these machines were designed primarily to support infantry, not to operate independently in fast-moving formations. Radios were scarce, coordination was slow, and tactical flexibility was limited. German panzer divisions, by contrast, were built around communication and concentration. Tanks, infantry, artillery, engineers and aircraft were integrated into a single system designed for rapid penetration and exploitation. This allowed German commanders to react quickly to opportunities and bypass strong points rather than grinding against them. French armor was often committed piecemeal, losing its potential impact before it could alter the strategic balance. Command structure amplified these problems. French high command favored centralized control and caution, believing that stability and methodical planning would prevent disaster. Orders moved slowly through layers of bureaucracy, while German commanders were encouraged to act aggressively and independently. This difference in tempo mattered enormously once the front began to fracture. Speed of decision became more important than the perfection of plans. By the time French leadership understood the scale of the German breakthrough through the Ardennes, the operational situation had already slipped beyond control. The defeat that followed was not the result of one mistake or one weak institution. It was the cumulative effect of air inferiority, fragmented armor doctrine, rigid command culture, and an enemy willing to accept extreme risk. The tragedy of 1940 lies not in French failure, but in how narrowly the outcome was shaped by modern war's unforgiving dynamics. One of the most persistent myths about the 1940 campaign is that German victory was the result of superior tanks. In reality, French armored forces were not technologically inferior in any simple sense. Many French tanks were better armored than their German counterparts and, in one-on-one combat, could be extremely dangerous. Vehicles such as the Char B-1 and the Somua S-35 were heavily protected and armed with guns capable of destroying most German panzers at typical combat ranges. The problem was not the quality of individual machines, but the doctrine that governed how they were used. French tanks were designed primarily as infantry support weapons, meant to advance methodically, break fortified positions, and protect foot soldiers. Speed, initiative, and independent maneuver were secondary considerations. As a result, tanks were often dispersed among infantry units, denying the French army the ability to concentrate armored power at decisive points. German doctrine approached armor in a fundamentally different way. Panzer divisions were built around the idea of concentration and momentum. Tanks, motorized infantry, artillery, engineers, and air support were integrated into a single system designed to rupture the enemy front and drive deep into the rear. German commanders accepted operational risk, often advancing with exposed flanks, because they believed speed would paralyze enemy decision-making. Radios were standard equipment in German tanks, allowing real-time coordination and rapid adaptation. In contrast, many French tanks lacked radios entirely, forcing commanders to rely on visual signals or pre-planned orders, which collapsed under the pressure of fast-moving combat. This difference in communication alone gave German units a decisive advantage during rapidly changing battlefield conditions. The French army did attempt to create armored formations, including armored divisions and mechanized cavalry units, but these formations were few in number and often committed too late. When French tanks did engage German forces in large numbers, such as at Stonne or during counterattacks after the Sedan breakthrough, they frequently inflicted heavy losses but lacked sustained air cover and logistical support. Ultimately, the armored war of 1940 was not decided by steel thickness or gun caliber, but by organization, communication, and doctrine. French tanks were strong individually, but weak as a system. German armor, though often technically inferior, functioned as part of a coherent operational machine. This turned French tactical successes into strategic irrelevance and allowed German breakthroughs to expand uncontested. One of the most decisive factors in the 1940 campaign was air power. While France possessed a significant air force on paper, it was poorly prepared for modern, high-intensity warfare. Many aircraft were obsolete, production was slow, and modern fighters were available in insufficient numbers. Even more damaging than technical limitations was the lack of a coherent doctrine for close air support, which left ground forces exposed during critical moments of the campaign. The German Luftwaffe, by contrast, was designed to operate as an extension of the army. Its primary mission was not strategic bombing, but direct battlefield support. German aircraft disrupted French communications, destroyed bridges, and attacked troop concentrations with devastating psychological effect. This constant pressure created panic, delayed responses, and amplified the speed of German armored advances far beyond their actual numerical strength. French command structures struggled to adapt to this new tempo of war. Decision-making was centralized, slow, and heavily dependent on fixed plans. General Maurice Gamelin believed that modern war would resemble the methodical battles of 1918, emphasizing preparation and control. German commanders, operating with greater autonomy, exploited gaps faster than French headquarters could even identify them. Communication failures worsened the situation. Reports from the front were delayed, incomplete, or contradictory. By the time French High Command understood the scale of the German breakthrough at Sedan, the opportunity to respond decisively had already passed. Units were ordered to counterattack without clear objectives, proper coordination, or air support, resulting in brave but ineffective resistance. Allied coordination added another layer of difficulty. French, British, Belgian, and Dutch forces operated under different command systems and strategic assumptions. Belgium's late entry into the alliance limited joint planning, while the British Expeditionary Force remained relatively small and cautious. The absence of unified command prevented rapid collective responses to German maneuvers. The collapse of the front was therefore not a simple failure of courage or equipment, but a failure of integration. Air power, armor, command flexibility, and communication all worked together for Germany, while they remained fragmented for the Allies. The 1940 campaign demonstrated that modern war rewards speed, coordination, and initiative, and punishes even well-equipped armies that cannot adapt in time. French armored forces are often misunderstood as weak or outdated, yet this view ignores crucial details. Many French tanks were heavily armored and well-armed for their time. Vehicles such as the Char B-1 and Saumur S-35 were superior in protection and firepower to many German tanks. The problem was not the machines themselves, but how they were organized, deployed, and commanded during the campaign. French tanks were primarily designed for infantry support rather than independent maneuver warfare. Most lacked radios, forcing commanders to rely on flags or messengers. This made coordination slow and inflexible. German panzer units, by contrast, were fully radio-equipped, allowing rapid adaptation on the battlefield and tight coordination with infantry and air support during fast-moving operations. Equally important was the way armored units were concentrated. Germany grouped tanks into large panzer divisions capable of deep breakthroughs. France dispersed its armor across infantry formations, reducing its impact at decisive points. Even when French tanks achieved local successes, they could not exploit them operationally because supporting units could not keep pace. Leadership culture further widened the gap. French officers were trained to follow detailed plans and await orders, while German doctrine encouraged initiative at lower levels. When unexpected situations emerged, German commanders acted immediately. French commanders often waited for authorization, losing precious time in a conflict where hours could determine the fate of entire armies. This imbalance became fatal during the breakthrough at Sedan. Once German forces crossed the Meuse River, French defenses fractured under air attacks and rapid armored pressure. Attempts to organize counterattacks were delayed and poorly coordinated. Despite individual acts of bravery, the operational situation deteriorated faster than French command could respond. The lesson of French armored failure is therefore not technological inferiority, but doctrinal rigidity. Tanks alone do not win wars. Without communication, concentration, and flexible leadership, even powerful weapons lose their value. In 1940, Germany mastered this integration, while France remained trapped between old assumptions and a new reality it could not yet fully grasp. The fall of France in 1940 is often remembered as a sudden collapse, but this perception hides a far more complex reality. The French army did not fail because it was cowardly or obsolete. It failed because it was forced to fight a modern war with assumptions shaped by an older one. The speed of the German offensive shattered planning cycles that depended on predictability and control. German success was not based on superior numbers or miraculous weapons. It came from doctrine. Concentration of force, air superiority, rapid decision-making, and the willingness to accept risk allowed German commanders to exploit opportunities faster than the Allies could react. Once momentum was lost, no amount of bravery or equipment could restore strategic balance. Allied coordination failures amplified these problems. French, British, Belgian, and Dutch forces did not share a unified command structure or common operational doctrine. Delayed political decisions and late alliance commitments prevented effective joint planning. When the crisis arrived, each army reacted according to its own logic, fragmenting the overall response. The evacuation at Dunkirk later became a symbol of resilience, but strategically it marked the end of the campaign. France continued to fight, yet without sufficient reserves, air cover, or freedom of maneuver. The Italian entry into the war further strained French defences. By June 1940, defeat was no longer avoidable, only manageable in its consequences. Post-war myths simplified the story into moral judgments rather than structural analysis. Blaming the Maginot Line or French mentality ignored deeper lessons about modern warfare. The campaign demonstrated that industrial capacity, equipment quality, and manpower are meaningless without integration, adaptability, and command flexibility in rapidly evolving conflicts. France in 1940 did not lose because it refused to fight. It lost because war had changed faster than its institutions could adapt. The campaign remains a warning. Military strength is not measured by weapons alone, but by how quickly a system can learn, coordinate, and act under pressure. That lesson still defines modern warfare today.